And I think this is interesting to talk about too. I mean, obviously it's
what
become a mainstream, I think you know.
I know, what is that actually? I don't know.
This is from the Wall Street Journal. They uncovered a story a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was a couple of months ago. I can't even remember the timeline. Oh, so you do know.
Well, I know the story. I know the story. The Wall Street Journal broke the story on July 15th.
Gotcha.
Okay. They didn't
you know
release
quite
the
a
letter.
bit of the details then, yeah.
I mean, of course, yeah.
Hi, I'm Zina, and I'm a leftist.
Hey, I'm Mason. I'm also a leftist.
I'm James. I'm a MAGA conservative.
I'm Kaizen, and I registered with the Republican Party. This is RoundTable. Are you ready?
Let's do it. I'm excited.
So to start, we need to address what just happened literally moments ago in the news, which is that Charlie Kirk was shot and killed. How's everybody feeling about this breaking news event?
I feel pretty hit with the gravity of what we're actually doing here. You know, I film outside, so I make content, make videos, and I'm known for shooting outside. I like to have it in nature, and I'm in public. And about a week ago, I started thinking, wow, my platform's getting pretty big. I actually have to worry about my personal safety. So when I heard about Charlie Kirk dying, you know, my first thought was, we can't keep doing this as America. We can't keep getting to the point where because we don't like what someone is saying, we feel the need to silence them, whether it's through cancellations or convictions or killings, right or left. And then on a personal level, I was like, wow, is this the path I'm walking? Like, do I have to worry if I go to a college or some sort of political event, I have to have armed security, I have to have a gun on myself every time I walk around? So yeah, it's kind of just shifted the whole discussion. It's not left-right to me. It's good versus evil. I think killing people for any political belief is evil. And I hope we can all sort of change the way that we look at this situation, because we've become so divided and so focused on political affiliation and tribe that I think we're abandoning principle in favor of preference. And it's driving people to be so self-righteous that they think killing people is a solution to political disagreements.
Yeah, I think that violence is something that is happening all across the world, and it's so rare when we see it to people that are high profile. I think that anybody that watches that video, regardless of affiliation, just feels like a intense disgust. Regardless of what people think, there's a human empathy that is just natural, regardless of who the person is that's the victim. I was not overjoyed looking at a video like that. And I see there's a lot of prominent right-wing influencers that are claiming that everybody that has a left affiliation is like celebrating or dancing. And I think that's a gross mischaracterization. So I just wanted to make that clear. I also know, I heard that you have pretty strong ties with Charlie, so I don't want to cause any, this happened just moments ago. I don't want to say anything that might set off anything. And while I do think that a lot of his views are abhorrent, and I think that he instigates violence in communities, I'm not going to look at that video and say that like that's something that overjoys me, because that's against my values as somebody who cares about human dignity.
And as someone who has spoken to Charlie Kirk but has never really known him except for by his political beliefs, I noticed that we can talk so broadly and so rashly about people who are distant from us or don't feel connected to us, but we also respond differently based on identity when people are experiencing violence. So I think that's something that I really want to bring light to in this conversation. And I think it's also important for us to kind of just like look at how politics have become so saturated with strong emotions. I think that is for a reason that's important, because politics is becoming so in our faces. And I think that as it's important to have these strong emotions, how we guide with and lead with our emotions is also super important. And I think that this is also a reflection of the terrible troubles that are going on in our country in regards to politics. I think that we definitely need to look on how we can make a path forward that doesn't make people feel that they need to express themselves in these violent ways. I think this is pretty clear.
Yeah, I'm sure you have a lot to say, and you deserve the space to say that. Just one thing that was reminded of is, I don't know Charlie as a father. I don't know him as a family man. I grieve for his wife and his kids. That's not something that anybody should have to go through. So that's just another thing. I only know him for his political beliefs and his very flamboyant personality that he showed the world. I don't know him as the family man, and I want to speak to the family as well.
Well, I think will all remember him, not even so much, Mason, for his political beliefs, but in the ways that we knew him when you debated him against him, Zina, as someone who, even if you disagreed with him vehemently, he listened to you. He was not one to engage with name calling. And I gotta be honest about my side. There are some on my side who do engage in the name calling, who do engage in the logical fallacies, who make the argument not about the argument, but about the person. And so I think Charlie's legacy will be one that both the right and the left can respect. And that is one of settling our differences, our disagreements through open debate. What we're gonna do here today, that's the kind of debate that I think that we need to do as Americans. And let's just, I think, recognize the dignity of free speech. That you and I, we can all disagree like heck, but at the end of the day, we are humans with equal dignity. I believe we are created in God's image. And I know that we're gonna live up to that purpose in our conversation today.
These case files, these documents to be released, and Thomas Massie, who is sponsoring a discharge position to get the House to vote on releasing those documents, says he doesn't believe you're implicated in these files, but many of your friends and donors may be, and he says that's why the Justice Department is redacting them and slow walking the release. Is the Justice Department protecting any friends or donors, sir?
So this is a Democrat hoax that never ends. You know, it reminds me a little of the Kennedy situation. We gave him everything over and over again, more and more and more, and nobody's ever satisfied. From what I understand, I could check, but from what I understand, thousands of pages of documents have been given. But it's really a Democrat hoax because they're trying to get people to talk about something that's totally irrelevant to the success that we've had as a nation since I've been president.
The Epstein Files are a Democrat hoax.
3, 2, 1.
I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
What I think the president's referring to is this newfound interest in Democratic leadership, Nancy Pelosi, AOC, Chuck Schumer, people who didn't speak about Epstein or the victims, people who were actually abused and trafficked. For 4 years, President Biden, Merrick Garland had the DOJ, they could have released these files. Now all of a sudden, when there's an opportunity to maybe smear the president, they now want to say that because they're not going to be released or they are going to be released, that this somehow implicates the president. When you heard Thomas Massie say he doesn't think the president's implicated, when Jeffrey Epstein's, the attorney that represented some of the women who went against Jeffrey Epstein says that Donald Trump fully cooperated, when Donald Trump kicked Jeffrey Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago when these allegations first surfaced, I think it's an opportunity, it's opportunism for the Democratic Party leadership to use the inherent confusion and ambiguity around the Epstein files to somehow smear the president. You saw Elon do a little bit of this in June when he said that he was in the Epstein files. What does that even mean? So that's what I view it as, is that not the Epstein investigation is a hoax. I think there's obviously real victims there, women who were abused and trafficked. But this newfound concern on the Democratic Party, and I gotta say for myself too, some Republicans like Thomas Massie, who I consider to be a grade A grandstander, he tweeted about Epstein 4 times prior to Donald Trump's second term, 76 times since Donald Trump took office. So it's a wedge that's being used, I think, to divide the party, to divide the country, and to hurt Trump.
You said confusion and ambiguity, and I don't even think those are adequate labels to talk about most of the media attention to the Epstein files. I'd say it's the energy that's generated amongst conservative pundits. And to your credit, I don't think that a lot of Democrats were talking about this while Joe Biden was in the executive, but day after day, we saw conservative pundits demanding this. This is what Donald Trump and J.D. Vance ran on.
They didn't run on it. To be fair,
they
though,
did run on it. J.D.
Right.
Vance specifically said, we will release the Epstein files in interview after interview.
Well, so it wasn't interview after interview. I went to many of Trump rallies. This was not coming up frequently. I agree with you, though, and I do place a lot of blame on the conservative pundits who did want clicks and wanted subscribers and wanted monetization deals. And they perpetuated this. Absolutely.
I think where the actual confusion kind of comes from is this idea of like, where is the hoax that we're finding? If we know that Trump ran a lot of his campaign off of, releasing these files, and we also had Pam Bondi, saying that the list was on her desk. And then the DOJ has come out recently to say that they found Trump's name in these files that we also know have explicit pictures of children inside of them. We also know that the man who is behind all of this, Epstein, is a sexual predator, a criminal. And if we know all these things, if if Epstein has referred to Trump as one of his best friends, if they have been exchanging, intimate letters with each other as best friends, if his name is in the files, we know that for sure, because FBI agents were told to comb through hundreds of thousands of pages. And if that information was even kept from Trump for months, just so the administration could figure out what was going on, we know, right, that we have the burden of proof is at the very least on the Republicans and the conservatives, or not the conservatives, but Trump himself, who ran his campaign off of this, and also who we know his name is in the files. I think that's just very clear.
First, we should talk about what it means to be a hoax. Because I agree with James that this is opportunism by the Democrats, but we should remember that the genesis of this whole situation was Trump was asked in an interview by Lex Friedman, I think it was in October, would he release the Epstein Files? Now, that's a far cry from campaigning on releasing the Epstein Files. He was responding to a request and he said, yeah, I'd look into it. Then when he entered office, Pam Bondi made a huge spectacle of releasing the Epstein Files. I don't know if you guys saw, but there was an event. They brought all these conservative influencers.
Binders, yeah.
They were the white binders. I thought it was in poor taste. And the expectations were mismanaged because there wasn't much in there. Either she was lying or it was a moment of incompetence. And that's what I actually think it was. Yeah. And I think after the MAGA movement was upset about this, rightly so, because expectations were mismanaged, then the Democrats smelled blood. They jumped on it. And to the extent that the Democrats are opportunistic and not actually sincere in wanting to get the Epstein Files released, because there were 4 years where they were mum to the moment, yeah, it's a hoax in that sense. But I don't think it's a hoax overall.
Correct.
And we should also be clear, what are we talking about when we say Epstein Files? Because these 33,000 pages of documents, Trump was already listed in the documents that were already public knowledge for years, by the way, because these are documents of all of Epstein's business dealings, everyone that he associated with. Being in the files is not proof positive that you molested children. There's a different question entirely of what does it say about Trump in the files? Yeah. And I think that's the next topic we'll get to. But to the extent that he's talking about the Democrats having manufactured outrage about that, I agree. But overall, this is not a hoax.
I don't want to speak for Zina, but I don't think we're going to be the biggest defenders of a lot of mainstream Democrats today. I think that what really is in the files is implications of people in high positions of power that are utilizing their leverage to do terrible things. And Donald Trump is not the sole person in that needs to be implicated. If Bill Clinton is in there, we want to see prosecutions. If there are top Democrat aides in there, we want to see prosecutions. Yeah. We want people to be held accountable in positions of power. It's not about political affiliation. But we know that Donald Trump is intentionally trying to spin this. He could very easily let this go away by just saying, I'm letting the Department of Justice handle it. We're not talking about it any further. But his insistence to either cast blame or throw it to other people or to inflate things that are not true by saying it's the Democrats that did this, they've been lying about it for years. It's the constant goalpost moving that is very clear to the American people and why I think a lot of Republicans are very pissed at MAGA.
And just to be clear, I don't view this as like Republicans and Democrats.
Not at all.
I honestly, not even
Also,
just this
I'm
issue.
not registered as a Democrat.
Yeah, I mean, I hate the labels. I realize we got to talk about it. It's good for marketing. I just hate it. It's like, I'm a guy who voted for Trump. I also voted against him the 2 prior elections. But to the extent that we're talking about the Epstein case, just to clarify, we already knew Trump was in the Epstein files. He's been there for years. We knew he flew on Epstein's private jet. It appeared that he never flew to the island, but yeah, we knew they were friends. There's nothing, Trump being listed in the Epstein files wouldn't be a revelation.
Right.
I think the revelation, though, is when he's talking about Ghislaine Maxwell, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Let me just finish, bro.
And saying that he can give a presidential pardon to them.
I wasn't done yet.
Go ahead, you can
So
finish.
just to finish, the revelation wouldn't be that Trump's name is in the files. The revelation would be that he did something illicit with minors, and that's in the files.
He's a co-conspirator, exactly.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying, James, is like there's a lot of motivated reasoning here that the bar can never be met and cleared for Democrats.
Correct.
It's like he keeps releasing files. He tried to get grand jury transcripts unsealed from New York and Florida judges.
Correct.
They denied that. They did release 3,000 more pages of documents. At what point is enough enough? And I think that's the point that he's making. Like, the hoax is that, hey, you guys aren't actually looking for justice and nothing would satisfy you outside of Trump saying, yeah, I did go to Epstein file and I did abuse children. And I think that's like an unreasonable standard.
It's really not. The simplicity is releasing those that were perpetrators. That's it. Just don't keep shielding the names.
But so-
that's the point here. And I think this is interesting to talk about too. I mean, obviously it's
What is
become
that?
a mainstream. I think you know.
What is that actually? I don't know.
This is from the Wall Street Journal. They uncovered a story a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was a couple months ago. I can't even remember the timeline. Oh, so you do know.
Well, I know the story. I know the story. The Wall Street Journal broke the story on July 15th.
Gotcha.
They didn't
you know
release
quite
the
a
letter.
bit of the details then. Yeah.
I mean, of course, yeah.
Yeah, they didn't release the letter. This was gotten by the Oversight Committee. I hear a lot of Republicans saying that this isn't him. The president has denied that it's authentic. He said that this is another part of the Democrat hoax, this fake story. I really don't care about this paper in particular. I know it's getting a lot of media attention right now, but when you see like the man that Donald Trump is, we can all acknowledge that this is not a man of traditional conservative values. I mean, this is a man who's been in multiple marriages. He said that he would have sex with his daughter if he wasn't related to her. He said that he'd grab women by his genitalia, bragging about that to a news reporter. I think we can all agree that this is not the epitome of what conservative traditional
Well, the epitome
values
of
would be.
conservative Christian values is not to judge somebody by their worst mistake from 20 years ago, whether or not they actually said something. What a conservative and a Christian does is they look at the person they are today. Let's just take this letter to the nth degree, just for a moment. Let's say I guaranteed you that Donald Trump wrote this. What does this prove? And I don't believe he did write this, but what does it prove if he wrote this?
Yeah, I think it proves a lot about, the relationship that Jeffrey Epstein, a sexual predator, and the President of the United States had.
Well,
it was one on the basis of, relationships with women that seemed to be extremely objectifying. We've also seen multiple testimonies from women that kind of align with the same, air of just objectification that we see is perpetuated in like letters like these.
Which testimony?
Why would there be? I can reference that after. But why would we see, for a birthday, like if you and your friend, like let's say your friend is coming to your birthday party, and they give you a letter, it would be of a naked woman and with strange innuendos of this one about secret, get-togethers and things.
Where's the secret get-together here exactly?
So, and may every day be another wonderful secret, and then he has a woman drawn here. I think that's just very strange, especially when we see.
Sure, it's strange. I would
I
admit
think
to
that
you,
we
if
can
Donald
say
Trump
it's
came out and
strange.
admitted he wrote this, I don't think he did, but if he did write this, at the worst, in the most guilty sense, it is strange and kind of weird,
Yeah,
maybe
so
worth
no
an
one is-
eye roll.
It's not a smoking gun. This is
Right.
just an additional piece of a
Right.
broader narrative that Donald Trump has proven himself to be.
Trump might be a pig. It doesn't make him a pedophile. This letter doesn't prove either.
I don't think anyone's trying to say that.
Yeah,
He's
but
also a sexual assaulter.
I'm not.
I mean,
I'm not
he's
even
been
clear.
held civilly
I'm not even
liable.
clear why we're talking about this when this is actually about the release of the Epstein Files.
But if you constantly have signs, right, that are buzzing around this picture, we have to take note of that if we're examining this issue in good faith. Trump has continuously over the years proven to speak about women in objectifying ways. It's strange, it's peculiar, and he had a close relationship with a sexual predator. Okay. That is very absurd, and I think that we need to note that. And this is another thing that shows us, the ways in which Donald Trump might view women.
To me, this doesn't really do much for the conversation. Honestly, it's a bit of a pop culture piece, and it's interesting. It doesn't tell me anything about what we actually need to be doing about the Epstein Files, which I think is the most important thing.
Surveillance footage at a local gun store shows Minnesota church shooter Robin Westman shopping for guns days before a deadly tragedy at a Catholic school last week. In the clips, the shooter could be seen browsing for ammo, testing out different guns, and smiling and laughing with staff and another customer. According to Krause, his staff said Westman acted perfectly normal and didn't display red flags.
It's too easy to buy a gun in America. Politicians blocking gun reform have blood on their hands.
3, 2, 1.
It's really tricky because I think there are two factors at play when it comes to the gun problem here. Number one, there is kind of a sensationalization of guns that we've seen in our country happen, but also what we find is that people who commit shootings like these tend to get them from, relatives who have them around. There's an interest, and they're pretty easily accessible for people, especially depending on what state you're in. I think that is a very big contributor to this problem. But also, I definitely think we need to focus on why people are turning to this kind of expression of violence to deal with like whatever's going on with them. I think that's like very indicative of something that's going on in this country. We're seeing these incidences happen over and over again to people of all different ages, of all different backgrounds. I think this is a wound in our country that we're ignoring and deflecting from for multiple different reasons.
Yeah, my light's green. I think that there's there's increased regulation that we should do in this country, but I'm not anti-gun in the same sense of a lot of, Democrat politicians or even Democrat voters who say that guns are like the root cause of a lot of this violence. I think they're really the tool that are used by individuals who are going to commit these types of crimes. And I'm probably more pro-gun than the average person on the left that you talk to. I think that it's really important for people to feel like they have agency to protect themselves and have self-defense. But I do think that it should be like the same requirements we have to get a driver's license that we could to get a gun, where you show actual knowledge of how to use it properly. Maybe you're trained through somebody in the same way you have like a learner's permit. That could be something that I think is achievable. I don't think that we should just ban guns altogether. I think that that's kind of like a fantasy that folks have, is just being able to remove guns. Sure, that'd be great if we could erase them with a snap, but it's not possible.
I agree. I mean, I think if you're concerned about fascism, you probably want guns. And I find that many of the people who are concerned about the overreaches of the government seem to want to ban guns, but guns are how you prevent overreaches of the government. So I think it's the Second Amendment for a reason. The Second Amendment is there to protect the First Amendment. Now, I do think guns, as Zina noted, are just part of the problem, and I think honestly downstream of the primary problem, which is mental illness. Or, I just call it evil. People wanting to do evil things. Like, why are people wanting to do evil things at all? Now, obviously, if someone wants to do an evil thing, having a gun creates more lethality. They can do more. But, these people want to kill people. And we need to figure out, why do people want to kill people? Whether it's for political reasons or they want to shoot up a school, like what is going on? And I think we have a very deep mental illness crisis in this country. I don't think it's well understood at all, actually. You could have no guns and still have crazy people who want to hurt each other. So we got to figure out what's going on there.
The number one type of gun violence in America is at the hands of a handgun, not at the hands of a AR-15 style rifle, whatever that means, or a shotgun or anything like that. It's a handgun. It's 2 out of 3 gun deaths in America are suicide. So quite literally, 2 out of 3 gun deaths are a mental health issue. Now, I guess the question is, if you could take one gun off the streets, if you could delete one gun, what would it be?
Well, I understand the total statistics, but when we look at these mass shootings, I mean, the only way that they are possible is the lethality of that particular weapon and what it's capable of.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, you can't fire a pistol into 50 people, or like in Las Vegas, where somebody is from the top ranks just unloading into 600 American citizens. That's not possible with a handgun.
Why would that not be possible with a handgun?
You think you can hit 600 people before you're able to get taken down?
He wasn't aiming to hit 600 people. He just sprayed. I mean, there's no, there's technically no reason.
Spray with the
when you say a handgun, I mean, look, there's a 9mm round can go into an AR-15 style rifle. It can go into a Glock, as well. The truth is that handguns kill more people than rifles. That's just a fact, by about 50 to 1. For 50 gun deaths at the hands of a handgun, only 1 will happen at the hands of a rifle.
Well, if we look at the problem of school shootings, what type of gun is most likely to be used in something like a school shooting?
Oh, I agree with you.
Or like a mass shooting,
I agree,
right?
but what percentage of gun deaths are school shootings, mass shootings?
Yeah,
about
of course.
1%.
I think, this prompt, right, we're referring to like a school shooting that's
we're talking about whether it's too easy to buy a gun. Is it too easy to buy a gun in America?
Yeah, so I think for one, it is too easy, but these are 2 different problems that we're trying to separate. Number one, deaths that are happening on a mass level by the basis of things like AR-15s and these larger assault rifles. And we can also talk about like the mental health problem that we're having, where people are, committing these atrocities to themselves, which I think is also kind of going to be at the hands of things like, again, like you said, handguns. But when we're talking specifically about something like the clip that we just saw, that is coming from people who have access to extremely powerful firearms. So I think that maybe we should look into why they have access to those things, and we should look into mitigating that. And in regards to people who are committing suicide using handguns, these are things that I think that we also need to worry about as well, how people have access to those kind of guns as well. I think both of these things need to be looked at as problems.
I agree, and I think there's kind of 2 conversations happening right now, because James, before you mentioned the difference between handguns and ARs, no one was really talking about that. We were more talking about, should people have access to guns, period? And there's a different question of, if you have access to guns, do you have access to all guns? Is it some sort of psychological competency test that you need to pass before you get an AR-15 versus a handgun?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, so I'm actually curious to hear your perspective on people's access to guns more generally. Because if we have a mental health issue, part of the problem is we need to solve the mental health issue, obviously, but do you think there should be more strict requirements on people passing some sort of test before they get access to any gun?
I don't. And the reason why is that mental health issue might afflict less than 1% of the population. You're going to then punish the other 99% by making them jump through hoops. So you say a psychological competency test. Well, if you're a single mom on the east side of Baltimore and you're living in an under-policed area and there are active threats to you and to your children, you don't have time to take off of work and to go pay a psychiatrist to go administer some tests. It's a hurdle.
How is that weapon going to be effective if you don't know how to properly use it?
Well, so there's 2 points
Just
there.
as a deterrent?
Well, no, but there's 2 points there. Yes, actually, in most cases, weapons are used as deterrents. 9 out of 10 times, according to the Department of Justice, the weapon doesn't actually even need to be fired for it to be a successful deterrent. If someone's running after you, simply taking out your gun and pointing at them. The second is it's not actually all that difficult to use a handgun. And I guess the third point is this idea of mental health checks is in effect a barrier to gun ownership, which is in effect a barrier to the ability to defend yourself.
I think that people who want to use guns need to take on that inconvenience of having to learn how to use a gun, maybe, again, some of these other structural barriers so that we can ensure the safety of thousands and thousands of people. We've had so many school shootings and so many, people that are like people like the president who have been victims of, misuse of firearms. And thus, if you want to use a gun, I think as well, if you are someone who does care about the safety of our communities, I think that taking on that inconvenience can also be seen as doing something that we know is taking part of a larger, greater good.
Look, I am sympathetic to the concern that a mom who's busy, who just wants to protect herself, shouldn't have to jump through a bunch of hurdles to just get a basic handgun. But again, there's degrees of lethality. If we're talking about having access to an assault rifle, I think it's reasonable to say, yeah, like that should be inconvenient. Yeah, you should have to pass a bunch of tests and jump through a bunch of hurdles. My concern in that case, what do you mean?
For what purpose? What do those tests prove?
That you're mentally stable enough to have access to a lethal weapon.
So taking a test and getting a good score proves that you're safe?
Yeah, it'd be similar like driving in a car. Like you're showing that you have competency. It's not like an incredible hurdle.
No, right. But the question isn't whether you're a competent user of a gun. The gun deaths in America aren't happening because a guy's an AR-15 and accidentally shoots up a school.
That's a barrier that stops those individual cases.
No, but I would argue that the folks who are as evil and as wicked have every incentive to go through as many barriers as possible to go through with that.
I'm glad we're talking about this. I think another big purpose on why guns are typically used in this fashion and why it's a uniquely American problem. Can we agree with that this is not something that we're seeing in other areas of the world?
Well, we have the highest murder rate in the world. So yeah, it's a uniquely American problem. We have so much crime here. We need guns to protect. That's why our founders created the Second Amendment.
But we have the most guns. Shouldn't we be the most safe?
Well, we are the most safe in large parts of the country because we have the most guns.
So is it we have the most crime or we're the most safe? I'm confused.
Well, there's a geographic disparity I think you can appreciate, right? So I'll give an example. DC, what's the gun ownership rate in DC?
I don't have the figure.
So there's 700,000 people in DC, about 300 of them, 300 have concealed carry permits. Up until President Trump took control of DC, we're looking at 3 to 4 carjackings a day, armed carjackings with guns. Do you think armed carjackers would be carjacking people if they knew there was a chance that the people in that car had a gun? Why don't carjackings happen in places like Florida or Alabama? Because there's 2 million concealed carry permits in those states.
It sounds like you're trying to convince us that we should allow people to get guns. That's not a contention here. I'm not anti-gun ownership.
No.
But what a big problem I do have is the fetishization of guns here in America specifically.
Sure.
Institutions like the NRA, or we have prominent politicians like Thomas Massey posing with his children.
Well, I'm no fan of Thomas Massey.
Right, but I think you can understand that not just him.
But
he's not an
most Americans
case.
don't fetish a gun. It's a tool that you use to protect your family. Most Americans don't fetish their gun.
When we see posing with your family, holding
most
hundreds
Americans are not Thomas Massey posing
right,
with
and
their
most
guns
Americans
around the
will not
Christmas tree.
commit mass shootings. But we need to address the reasons why those individuals might have proclivities in order to do that.
Why do you think the individual shot up that church in Minneapolis?
I think that person was deeply troubled.
Why do you think they were?
I don't know the individual case, but what I do know is that they had a massive amount of armory. It was not just one gun that they bought. There were photos within their room of dozens and dozens of guns with munitions that had messages written on them. It was clear that they wanted not only the attention, but they also wanted to deliver a message.
What was that message? Because it was pretty clear from the scribblings on those magazines along with the manifesto. It was a anti-Christian message. That's why that individual was shot.
It was
up a
multiple.
church.
It was anti-Jewish, it was anti-Christian, it was anti-Trump,
Correct,
it was
but
anti-gender affirming care. There's a lot of different things.
Correct. Gender affirming care. What do you mean by that?
Well, they wrote specifically in the manifesto how they were tricked by the LGBTQ community or whatever. They were a detransitioner, somebody who thought that they were transgender, and then through some sort of psychological conditioning from members around them, specifically satanic online groups that were also like pedophilic in nature. I don't want to get all into the specifics, but a lot of it was extreme radicalization amongst these online chat rooms where this person was in a community that was encouraging this type of behavior. And that plays into the fascist rhetoric that they demonstrated, the Russian obsession, and the neo-Nazi imagery that was scattered throughout most of their journals.
Do you think people who suffer from gender dysphoria should be able to own a gun in this country?
If we want to go there, we can go there.
Well, I'm going there just because this is actually an active debate that's happening. The Department of Justice has floated this proposal that those who are transgender would be banned from owning a firearm on the basis of mental illness.
I think it's interesting. We could just bring up, do you think people with glasses should be allowed to have a gun? Do we think
that's not an active proposal right now?
Hold on. I know, but I'm laying something out here. We could make a proposal and attach an identity to someone and say, this is up for debate now. The question is why? Is there any indicator that people, who have gender dysphoria are violent towards other people? I mean, I don't think that we have statistics in any way proving that. If we want to look at depression, if you're saying, these people are more likely to be depressed, well, we have a bunch of people across a bunch of different identities that are also depressed. Are anyone who is more likely to be depressed should not have a gun? Is that the argument we're trying to make?
Making that individual case a representative of an entire group is not how we do proper policy.
Absolutely.
It'd be the same as saying that we should ban guns from all white men because a majority of these mass shootings are committed by white men.
Or all
which
black
everybody
men,
would say
because
is
most
wrong.
black-on-black crime would be at the hands of a handgun. Absolutely. That's unfair. That's deeply unfair, those gross mischaracterizations. But if you look at the causal mechanism, if these so-called gender-affirming interventions increase irritability, increase an inclination toward violence, that's something to consider.
But where are those premises coming from?
Men commit like the majority of the violent crimes. Should they not be allowed to have guns?
Yeah, so hold on. I think we can actually be a bit more precise here, right? Because if someone has a psychological disorder that makes them have a propensity toward violence, or they're on psychiatric medication that makes them have a propensity toward violence, absolutely, we shouldn't be allowing them to have at least an assault weapon, maybe a handgun. Now, not all people with gender dysphoria have a proclivity toward violence, though. I think what you're saying is maybe on certain medications that have side effects, they can have a proclivity toward violence. And I would say, okay, well, then the trade-off is if you want to go on these medications to change your hormonal profile, you're free to do that, but you can't have access to an AR-15. Rather than saying, by being part of this class of people,
that's right.
We're
talking about
lose access. And
taking the medication.
And this is a problem when we start attaching legislation to identity. When we start attaching to identity, then it's not precise and it feels like it's persecuting a particular group. And I have tons of concerns about all of this gender affirming care and transgenderism and all that stuff. But I think if we want to craft good policy, it shouldn't be about people. It should be about people on psychiatric medication or people with specific psychological profiles.
I mean, even still, I think we would just have to look at statistics of people who are on these medications and how much of the crime or how many crimes they're committing. I don't have any of the information around that type of stuff.
Any medication with a side effect that leads to higher chances of being violent isn't allowed to have a gun, or at least it limits the lethality of the firearms you have access to. I think that's a much more reasonable discussion.
Correct. Or being a drunken fool, you shouldn't be able to.
Yeah,
own
if you're a
guns.
felon, even certain misdemeanors.
So actually, I would disagree on the felon point because, look, you've got people who've long paid for their crimes in this country. My father committed a felony back in the late 1980s. The idea that he cannot own a gun in the state of Florida because of something he did 30, 40 years ago is unacceptable.
Well, hold on, unacceptable. If you murdered someone, you would say that.
Well, if you murdered someone,
own a gun.
Well, no, actually, I disagree. So one, I disagree. One, if you murdered somebody, you're probably still in prison.
But what if you're not?
So it depends on the specific conditions. My father didn't murder anybody. He was in for 1 year and a day. I think the point is that it's not fair to go into a place like Birmingham, Alabama, historically an under-policed community with a lot of black folks and say, you know what, because the men here got rounded up and were convicted of drug crimes and did a year and a day, they can't own a gun to protect themselves in a community that is replete with violence. That's not fair to them.
Yeah, and that's not what I say. It's a bit of a straw man. The point is...
I'm not talking about you. I'm just talking generally about the policy of felons prohibiting.
Yeah, but the point is more that there are cases in which you committing certain crimes should disbar you from being allowed to own certain firearms.
Yes, if you committed first-degree murder with a firearm, right? Now, if you defended yourself 20, 30 years ago with a gun and got 5 years over that, that's a different story. But remember, most people aren't in prison for murder.
Israeli airstrikes today hit a hospital in southern Gaza. At least 20 people were killed.
Among them, 5 journalists for international news outlets, including the Associated Press and Reuters. Imtiaz Tayeb has more, and we caution you here that some of the images in his report are graphic.
The killings were captured on live TV. News cameras were already trained on the Nasser hospital after an initial Israeli strike killed several people. A short time later, a second Israeli strike hit as first responders and journalists had already rushed to the scene. Among the more than 20 killed were medics and civilians, as well as journalists Miriam Abu Daga, who worked for the Associated Press, Hussam al-Masri, who was with Reuters, Mohammed Salam with Al Jazeera, Ahmed Abu Aziz, who worked with the Al-Quds feed agency, and the independent photojournalist Moaz Abu Taha.
By targeting hospitals and killing journalists, Israel has crossed the line from warfare to war crimes.
3, 2, 1.
Incredible.
I'm so happy.
But doesn't this speak to the transcendence, that it's not just left and right, that we can recognize an issue that's a bad one and just call it out?
I think that when you're talking about institutional power, that's where it's going to be different. And none of us are legislators here. None of us are contributing to the genocide that's continuing to happen. So I'm very much appreciative that the United States electorate is moving in a direction to recognize war crimes when they see it. That is fantastic. And I'm so glad that we don't have to debate the humanity of Palestinians that are going through this type of tragedy right now. Yeah. But the current administration is in full favor of what Israel is doing, and they are giving zero checks. In fact, the administration is actively targeting those that are critical of the Israeli regime. So that I hope that you would consider, even though you might respect some of the issues of the Trump administration, that is a violation of our freedom of speech, and that is an explicit overreach of the government for what people can hold as far as criticisms of a different country's regime.
Sure. So it's obviously a war crime, and we all agree on that. But just to bring some polarity here, just because otherwise it's not going to be a very interesting conversation, the whole war was started on a war crime, and that was October 7th. So
can we agree on that?
No.
So you don't think October 7th was a war crime?
I think October 7th is an inflection point in the ongoing conflict. I wouldn't even call it a war because it's so one-sided, and it has been for over a century.
How would you, for someone who, let's just say, didn't know anything about October 7th, 2023, how would you describe objectively what happened that day?
Yeah, I think that October 7th, we saw civilians die. We saw people who, some weren't even Israeli citizens, going there for a music festival, people getting killed in very extreme and gory ways. That is not something that anybody can watch and feel a sense of justice for. That's something that is very clearly a disgusting thing that happened. I think that when we're looking outside of our emotional capacity as humans who have empathy, we can also understand why violence occurs. We can talk about that, right? I think that even for like German citizens in World War II, we would have some sort of empathy for those that were involved in the conflict that the United States had on them. Correct? Even if they disagree ideologically.
Sure.
Yeah, but we understand that violence is happening in a particular way because of certain actions done by different people that are external of just the individual actions made by those people.
So what would that context be?
Can I actually, just to stay on the topic of war crime, I'm not talking about the causality and whether October 7th was initiated by Hamas or it was in response to Israeli oppression. I'm just saying categorically it's a war crime because they targeted innocents.
That wasn't your initial question. You said, did this start by October 7th? It is a war crime.
Okay, cool. We agree on that then. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's something important to note about what happened here is just like the targeting of journalists that we've seen. This is just, again, indicative of the fact that this is not any kind of like two-sided, conflict. Instead, this is one side who is controlling the narrative and just inflicting a lot of pain on a community in ways that are detrimental and need to stop. Like, I think that there shouldn't be some point where we're hoping for it to get so bad. We've been there for a long time. And I think that now when we're seeing like journalists, people who cover things, people who want to be independent and give us the facts are being targeted is important. And it's also a tactic of destroying kind of our ability to perceive information impartially that we've also seen go on in America. It's something that I'm very scared of in all ways, but specifically here it's super important because people are dying in our faces, and I think it's important.
James, do you have nuance in having very strong support of the Trump administration while also recognizing that the Israeli regime is committing war crimes?
So what I would say about this, and it's really troubling because I think about the issue that this idea of anti-Semitism, right? Obviously, when you get kids who are being jumped on a campus for being Jewish, that's wrong. But to sit there and criticize the Israeli government with substance and say, look, what happened to this hospital, what happened here, that's wrong. That's not anti-Semitic. We have free speech in this country, right? And so it's the same free speech that allowed Dr. King to step out and say things that were deeply unpopular in the early 1960s, but protected his right to say it. And it protects rights on the left and the right to say things and to be critical of the Israeli government. The truth is, nobody would bat an eye if any of us were critical of the Russian government or the Ukrainian government or the Colombian government or the Mexican government or the Venezuelan government. But why is it that when we're critical of the Israeli government, it seems that there's a fourth branch that comes out and wants to undermine that and label it and almost criminalize it, right? Not even offer an opinion that can be refuted. And that's what really bothers me as a free speech absolutist.
So when Trump says that certain states that are deemed critical of Israel won't receive federal aid, does that disappoint you?
It disappointed me to see that announcement. I was grateful to see that the DHS, and by the way, I think we can be pretty honest here. President Trump didn't write that memo. This came from some junior official in DHS. When the president was asked about it, it quickly got rescinded. I know the president to be someone who supports free speech, who supports your right to say things. We just saw this the other day when he said that it's not just anti-Semitism, there's anti-Christian bias. We saw actually anti-Muslim bias in the early 2000s after the 9/11 attacks. Arab American families being rounded up and questioned by the FBI was not okay after 9/11. And so I think this idea of taking everything that happens from the Trump administration and trying to blame it on President Trump as if everything crosses his desk and he personally signs it, when he was made aware of this, it got rescinded within 24 hours.
I think he should say that to the American people.
I think he should as well. I think he should as well.
I think his direct words are so impactful on this issue, where he tells Bibi, we will give you whatever you need to get the job done. That's explicit language. When he says Israel doesn't know what the they're doing, and a week later he's pulling out the chair of the facilitator of these war crimes. It's very clear that Donald Trump.
No, but who was sitting there? That was Bibi. It was Bibi.
Yeah. He's pulling out the chair for Bibi.
I guess, but look, at the end of the day, we're going to be happy if this war is over, and we're going to be happy if the president. I think we would all want to give President Trump credit if we can actually get a real peace in the region here, right?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I want there to be a stop of conflict in the region. Everything that Donald Trump has shown us thus far is indicative that that will not happen, or the solution will be full Israeli control of both regions that currently have Palestinian people in it. And when he's talking about building big resorts and he's posting AI videos of casinos on Gaza while people are actively living in rubble, that is absolutely disgusting. And I think that we can all acknowledge that.
What would you like to see happen? Like, what do you think a constructive solution to end the war, create long-term peace?
I'm glad you asked that. That'll probably be a point of contention. We can get away from the kumbaya of the green lights right now. But I think that we need a full state that recognizes people's human rights. I think that you need full equal rights. So for me, when people ask that explicitly, I think that a one state, you could call it Israel, you could call it Palestine, you could call it Hebrew Palestine, whatever it is that you'd like to do, you need to recognize people's individuality and respect their equal rights. And that doesn't mean that you allow lawlessness or chaos. And if there is conflict, you address that as it comes. But that doesn't mean that we can have an entity that's backed by the largest military in the world and 2 colonies that are under subjugation where their food is controlled, their ports are controlled, and they're living in an open-air prison.
From this point forward, what I'd like to see Israel do is sketch out a plan for, hey, what's a better future for the Palestinian people that makes it so that they would never even want to choose Hamas again. And I think to your point, when a nation is under the control of another nation, their maritime access is constricted, their airtime access is constricted, yeah, inevitably there's going to be a counter response, and that's what Hamas did. But from this point forward, if I were Israel, I wouldn't be comfortable with Hamas having control of the region. So I would say something more like, hey, we need to actually have the other Arab nations in the region administrate that area while we do some sort of large-scale reconstruction project in the area. And agreeing with you that Trump's videos about Gaza turning into the Riviera of the Middle East were incredibly distasteful. I actually think
It's more than distasteful, but continue.
Okay, repugnant, evil, reprehensible, I don't know what you want me to call it, but I think the point here is to get the other Arab nations involved because the neighbors have been on the sidelines in a conflict that is a regional conflict. It's not just about Israel and Hamas or Israel and Palestine. So actually after what happened when Trump proposed that the US take over that region is they actually came together, the Arab nations, and they proposed a plan for, I think it was $50 billion to take over and rebuild Gaza with the Palestinian people there, which I actually think is a much more sustainable long-term solution. Because if I'm Israel and I just got attacked by Hamas, I'm like, sorry, I'm not ready to give these people over statehood. Maybe in the long term, but they need to prove that, and they haven't proven that. In fact, they've actively disproven that they can do that when they elected Hamas and then Hamas did this thing.
I really like this setup better than...
It's so much more productive.
This is great. Like, can I just
I like the middle ground a lot.
Can I do these? Like, I like this.
Have you decided you're definitely going to send National Guard troops to Chicago?
Well, we're going in. I didn't say when, we're going in. When you lose, look, I have an obligation. This isn't a political thing. I have an obligation. When we lose, when 20 people are killed over the last 2.5 weeks, and 75 are shot with bullets. So let me tell you a little story about a place called D.C., District of Columbia, right here where we are. It's now a safe zone. We have no crime. It's in such great shape. You can go and actually walk with your children, your wife, your husband. You can walk right down the middle of the street. You're not going to be shot, Peter. You're safe.
Trump's federal takeover of local police in cities like D.C., Chicago, and Baltimore is a necessary intervention to combat crime.
3, 2, 1.
What's green and red together? Blue? Purple?
No.
What color is that?
I don't know.
That's what I would pick if I could, but I can't. And the reason why is because these are actually 3 different areas with different legal requirements. So DC actually is a district, it's not a city. And technically the government actually, or federal government can actually federalize it for 30 days. And they invoke the Home Rule Act. And in that case, I think Trump had the legal authority and the ethical requirement to do that. Chicago, he can't actually do this. We have something called posse comitatus. He can't just send the National Guard into a city without the governor's approval. So I want him to follow the law here. That said, if we look at the situation that's going on in these cities, it's abysmal. And I think it's actually a reflection of the normalization of crime and decay in American cities that, frankly, I feel like we should be more up in arms about than the fact that Trump wants to send in troops to clean up crime. Because if you look at DC, people said, oh, well, there's a 30-year low in the crime rate. Yeah, well, it's been at 50 years highs pretty much since the 1980s and the crack epidemic. And people have been living in these conditions for so long that a 30-year low sounds good, but in reality, it's still a terrible situation. And I think as Americans, we've become so used to this chronic decay in our cities that when someone introduces an acute solution, we have more of a reaction to the solution than the problem that we're all living in. So I would like to see collaboration with cities that don't want federal intervention because, yeah, I think there just needs to be more policing in Chicago. Some of these areas in Southside Chicago have higher crime rates than Honduras. It's insane. But I don't think that Trump has unilateral authority to do this in Chicago and Maryland. But I'd like to see Governor Pritzker and whoever the governor is of Baltimore, of Maryland, collaborate with him because they're not fixing it themselves.
Yeah, I think it's super important that we talk about crime. The problem is the framing of this situation is honestly ridiculous. I mean, if we want to talk about crime rate and like where crime is the worst, it's happening in often a lot of red states. We're seeing places like Birmingham, Alabama, who have drastically drastically high crime rates. We don't see Trump, sending the National Guard there and overstepping his power in that way. We also act as though, bringing the National Guard on U.S. citizens is the right way to combat crime, as if we don't know what the causes of crime are, which are poverty and desperation and things of that sort, which again should be operated at the governing level. But even still, I do believe that there are things that we need to do to fix the way that we absolve crime and we fix crime. But bringing in more force, which seems to be, if we look at all the prompts we've talked about today, force is the way that Trump seems to try to solve every single problem. And that's not the case. Long-term, experts are very concerned with Trump's, militant response to crime, because crime doesn't go away with more eyes and more a dictatorship approach. Instead, it's, working with these communities from the ground up, figuring out, again, how we can, control for these causes, which again are almost always going to be poverty, something that Trump has not used his administration to try to help in many ways. Most prices of electricity are going up. He's cut SNAP benefits. We're seeing Trump employ more military force, dumping more money into the military and less money in building up our country from the ground up. And I think that's the problem.
So I agree with a lot of what you said, but I think we're falling into a false dichotomy here, because I agree he does need to be working with the communities. A lot of this can't be solved at the federal level. He can't just use force, but force solves part of the problem. It's similar to when we were talking about the Venezuelan narco-terrorists bringing fentanyl into the country. It's a necessary but not sufficient condition. But violent crime has dropped in DC since they federalized the area. And there's people who would be dead if we didn't federalize that area. So lives were literally saved. Is it a long-term solution? No, it's not a long-term solution to have people walking around with ARs in the streets of all of our American cities. So we need to focus on the longer term. But then the criticism should be, hey, Trump, don't just make this political theater, go further.
I think it would be extremely disingenuous to act as though this is a first move for Trump. Trump in this video just explained how DC is now a safe zone and he has fixed DC's, long-term problem with crime, as if he has. He hasn't. This is one thing he's going to do, and he's going to move on and continue using military force to oppress different states and bring ICE to forcibly remove people from their places of work, from their homes, and now he's allowed to do that on the basis of skin color and how people speak. Even if our goal is safety and to make the places that are drastically unsafe in this country safer, it simply doesn't make sense that we have Birmingham, Alabama, and other cities like Memphis, et cetera, that have much higher crime rates than places like Chicago or DC that aren't being targeted. I think there's a reason for that.
What's the reason for that?
Oh yeah, probably because of the fact that I think Trump wants to target cities from which he doesn't like the governance, or he doesn't like the fact that maybe that they're blue, et cetera.
So Birmingham and Memphis are both blue cities that are predominantly African American. They're very, very similar to DC. So
yeah, but
could it just be the fact that he's
the states as well, the governing, the authority in that state is going to also be determining as well of whether he wants to go into that state.
So he's looking at the entire local political apparatus to determine? No, I don't see that. As we sit here, the president is inclined, has shown this publicly, is inclined to now send federal agents and the National Guard into New Orleans, which is in a red state. It's a blue city in a red state. What I think the president is doing is he's looking at the crime stats per capita, saying that DC is at the top, worse than any country in South America or Central America, saying it is not okay that 20 to 30 people are getting shot every week in DC. Oh, and 90% of them are black. 90% of the victims are black. So I don't understand this. You've got folks in the Democrat Party who are saying in the morning that Donald Trump's a racist, doesn't care about black people, and then he cares about him too much by sending in the National Guard. How do we reconcile this? We now have a president who's standing up for black lives.
I don't think he's standing up for, okay, you go ahead.
Yeah, I think that we can all agree that what Trump is doing is a response to crime, right?
Agreed.
It's a direct response for crime that's happening. But it's important to talk about the difference between a response versus understanding what the cause is or what the remedy is. Because you can show a lot of force, like we've already said, that's not a long-term sustainable solution. I don't think that anyone's going to disagree here. What I'm curious to hear from the two of y'all, I think I have an inclination what Zina thinks, but what do you think causes crime in these communities?
I think there are root causes to crime. I want to make no mistake of that. I think there's a real conversation we have to have about fatherlessness in this country. There's a real conversation about the criminal justice system we have to have in this country. But if you've got root causes that have been 40, 50, 60 years in the making, how can we sit here when people are being gunned down on the south side of Chicago or Anacostia, DC, and say, nope, we're not going to have federal agents because we got to go back to the root causes? In that moment, Zina, in that moment, when you got somebody being dragged out of a Toyota Corolla at gunpoint, we don't have time for the root causes conversation. These took 50 years of fatherlessness to get to this point in black communities in parts of DC and Baltimore. We're not going to solve it overnight. We have to have a solution. And what President Trump has offered in DC, Chicago, Baltimore, New Orleans is a real solution.
But it's not a solution. To Zina's point, it's political theater. When you have the president that's tweeting, I can smell the deportations in the morning, we're going to go in, it's war in Chicago. Why is the president of the United States declaring war on its inhabitant states? That's not something that's showing, I want to address this issue. It's showing a physical force and a show of force that's intended to show people like J.B. Pritzker, who might have presidential ambitions, to show people like Wes Moore in Maryland, who also might have particular political ambitions. Like this is somebody who is known to be a showman. He's a reality TV star. A lot of his policy is influenced by what the perception is of the country. It's not about actually solving what those problems are in the first place.
So let me just ask a question. So I agree with you. Force alone is not the long-term solution. Do you think it's helpful in the short term?
Well, I think a lot of this also plays into what's changing as far as the narrative of conservative pundits specifically. And I asked that initial question because I want to see what y'all's diagnosis is. Because in my mind, there's two possible solutions for why particularly lower income communities and those that are communities of color are committing most of the crime. It's either one, that poverty creates a cyclical violence. It creates harsh conditions in which most of these large urban populations are densely living populations. People are in constant proximity of each other, and the income inequality is skyrocketing to where people who have zero material conditions are looking at those that have immense amounts, and that can create feelings of that hostility, which is what that violence is in the first place. Or you say these communities of color are inherently more violent, which we're starting to see with people like Matt Walsh, with people like Ben Shapiro, who are saying we need to have an honest conversation on black on white crime. We should be telling our kids to be fearful if they're going into a community of mostly black people for their own lives, which I think is abhorrently racist and something that we've taken decades to move away from. And that regression is really terrifying for me to see, especially since these people have so much influence.
Okay, so I want to, you didn't directly answer the question, but I also understand the view you have is that this is not just about the short term, it's about how sincere is Trump's effort, is this inflaming racial tensions, and I get that. In the short term, forceful intervention decreases the levels of violent crime. So what I'm saying is that in the short term, I like this solution. It's not sufficient in the long term.
We can talk about what the short-term solutions are, right? I think like putting a Neuralink chip in all of us so we have immediate compliance would end all crime. But would we say that a solution like that is something that we should advocate for?
I think it's a great point.
But
I think it's a great point.
But a Neuralink chip doesn't have it has a different downside than just sending in the National Guard into DC for 30 days. And then removing them.
I'd say utilizing the military against their own citizens is a similar policy that I would advocate against. I don't think that the net or the immediate benefits of that, even if you call them benefits, outweigh the potential of militarizing police and making that normalized here in this country.
Okay, so I just disagree. I mean, I think the short-term benefits outweigh the short-term cost.
Well, I think if we kill everybody under a certain income level, we get rid of all crime too.
I do want to talk about.
We should advocate for.
Yeah, and that's a complete disanalogy. We're not talking about killing people. We're talking about preventing people from being killed by having federal troops involved.
You don't think any of these federal troops
are
killing people?
This is such a hyperbolization of the point. But to the conversation about like racial patterns, what I've noticed is people like to conflate any kind of observation about per capita differentials between black and white people when it comes to crime with racism. And this conflation is actually shutting down conversations before they actually start. And it's actually perpetuating a victim narrative where it's like, oh, it's just economics, it's just factors outside of people's control. Even when you adjust for economics, black people per capita commit more violent crimes than any other racial group in America. Does this mean that black people are inherently inferior? Of course not. It means that there's multiple factors, some within the black community's control, some outside of the black community's control, that we need to have an honest conversation about. But when we say things like, oh, well, they're saying that black people are 30 times more likely to murder white people than the reverse, that's racist. No, it's not. It's observing a racial pattern. Observing a racial pattern is done by racists, but not all people who observe racial patterns are racist. So instead of having this conversation about like the straw man, let's have a conversation about the steel man, because I agree. One of the solutions in a lot of these communities is they are fatherless. They have fatherless homes. They don't have strong church communities. They don't have a strong family structure. And some of that actually can be changed by people within the community instead of us constantly talking about factors that are only outside of people's control.
Yeah, so just to comment on this, because this is getting to a point where I'm hearing some things that don't actually sound like we're identifying a racial pattern. When we talk about controlling for the factors that cause things that are unwanted in certain communities, if you want to talk about fatherlessness, where do we think that comes from? When people are in communities with more income, they're more likely to have households that stay together, or not even just that, but don't result in the drastic effects that we see happen from fatherless homes in Black communities compared to white. Again, when we have that difference in class, that's going to manifest in so many different ways, the impacts, right? So we're going to see more, again, children out of wedlock. You're going to see more people, again, having to leave because of the economic constraint of having a child.
Education.
You're going to see less education, right? And people getting, together and having children maybe earlier instead of later. We know that, getting married later actually predicts a longer marriage. It predicts you staying together, things of that sort. All of those things are manifestations of poverty. Okay, well, why are a bunch of Black people in poverty? There's so many reasons for that.
Why?
Generational wealth that has come from even the beginning. Like as soon as Black people were out of slavery, we saw Jim Crow laws bar them from accruing generational wealth, which is what, again, predicts how the economy looks today. So generational wealth is the biggest problem. Black people have been barred from generational wealth because of racist laws that have existed in this country for years and years and years that were only taken away a couple decades ago. We can't act as though that's never happened.
We certainly can't act
acting that way.
We certainly can act that way, but there's also a component of intergenerational wealth that also speaks to this intergenerational issue of fatherlessness as well. If you're growing up and you didn't have a father and your mother didn't have a father, that lack of wealth, that poverty. Well, no, not necessarily, actually. Divorce rates are higher amongst the wealthy folks than they are amongst the poor folks.
So there's a difference between the fatherlessness that happens in the Black community compared to like white communities having divorce.
Why is there fatherlessness in the Black community?
Okay, yeah. So once again, when you have children really early, right, and you don't have a lot of income,
so
what's going to happen?
If the Amish have children early, why do they stay together but Black folks don't?
Probably because of like cultural differences.
I agree. Cultural differences. I agree. So let's stick on that point. Cultural differences.
Let her finish.
Because if you want to have you're going to need a comprehensive discussion on this. It's not going to be a one answer type of thing. So once again, the way that an Amish culture has fostered over generations in this country is going to be vastly different compared to Black people who were subjugated to slavery for 400 years and only just has removed the systematic racist barriers, right, in this country, right? Amish people have never been targeted in this way, ever.
Yeah, I think that we're all talking about crime being a problem. I think that where we're having a bit of a disagreement is the root cause of that problem and what the solution to be to remedy that in the first place. I think what Zina and I were trying to say is understanding historical context does not take away individual agency, but it's important when making policy prescriptions. And I think what I've heard from the both of you is that we need to address the current dangers that are present in these lower income communities. So I think we're all in agreement that something needs to be done. We definitely disagree on what those solutions are. And I'll leave it there.
It was a precision strike that signals a major escalation by the Trump administration, which says it will use the military to fight the flow of drugs coming into the U.S.
We just, over the last few minutes, literally shot out a boat, a drug-carrying boat, a lot of drugs in that boat.
The Trump administration claimed it killed 11 members of a Venezuelan gang and that the vessel was in international waters.
Trump's lethal strike on a Venezuelan boat was a justified act of national defense. What do you think?
3, 2, 1.
Okay, interesting.
You got to look at the prompt and think about what we mean by these words. Justified and national defense. What does national defense mean to you?
I'd like to hear your take on this.
Well, so
I have a lot of questions for you, though.
Yeah, so national defense means defending the nation. And we're losing 200 people a day to overdoses. We're losing 200 people every single day to poison that's coming through our ports, across our borders, in our mail. So when I think national defense, I'm not just thinking about the potential of a Chinese airstrike. I'm thinking about the real and present danger of 100,000 overdoses every single year. So a justified act is one in which you would protect the nation by taking out a potential target. The potential target is a boat full of criminals and drugs in international waters heading toward the United States like hundreds of boats had done in years prior to try to smuggle drugs into our country, to poison our communities, and to kill people, young and old, rich and poor, black and white. And so to this question, I believe that lethal strike was in fact a justified act of national defense.
Do you think that, or why do you think that they were bringing drugs into the United States?
Because they wouldn't be the first and they won't be the last Venezuelan drug traffickers to bring in drugs into the United States.
But what's the cause of them traveling with that type of substance? What's the cause of that?
The root cause?
Yeah, you're a markets guy.
Oh, the root cause is there's demand, of course.
There's demand, exactly.
Correct.
So addiction is something that heavily needs to be treated here in this country. Neither Zina or I will say that the drug overdoses that we're seeing is, one, something that's sustainable, or two, a signal of a stable nation. That's not in anybody's best interest, especially when most often it's targeting low-income communities. Drugs are used across the economic ladder, but specifically these overdoses are happening to those that have very little resources. So it's important that we address addiction. I think that is vital. And mental health is another thing that leads people towards these dark, desperate paths. I don't think that killing these 11 people extrajudicially is going to solve the drug problem here in America. If anything, this is political theater to show that we have a strong man in the office saying, hey, look, I'm doing something about this, even though it's not causing the actual root cause of why we're seeing drug overdoses in the first place. And what we see is these military strikes, one, they need authorization by Congress. So completely bypassing that checks and balances in the Constitution. I'm sure both of you are fans of the Constitution.
I am, but which part of the Constitution says the president needs an authorization for a military strike?
Well, the military strike, there's been some confusion after the AUMF, so I think 9/11's muddied the waters a bit. But if we want to go through proper channels, you need congressional approval to do a military strike like that.
You need congressional approval for a war. You don't need congressional approval for a singular act of national defense. I mean, if the Chinese were about to nuke us, we wouldn't need to run to Congress.
Do you think that nuking and 11 people bringing drugs is exactly comparable?
Well, legally speaking, you're making the argument that it is, because you're saying we need permission for any sort of attack.
No, you need to prove imminent threat. And that
is imminent threat.
No, it's
Venezuelan
not.
gangbangers bringing poison into our country.
That's not an imminent
well,
threat.
Just to your point, I just want to correct one thing you said.
I'm not saying it's not dangerous. I'm not saying that those drugs are not causing harm to people, but you need to prove that there is an exact attack on American people. Them bringing drugs is not that. We have law enforcement, we have legal channels to take care of these things. It does not be through the authorization of the United States.
Well, and sadly,
there's a reason why we have the Coast Guard. There's a reason why we have the DEA.
Correct.
It's not just President Trump pressing a button.
But I actually agree with you with what you said, and I think you meant it to be not a positive, but I actually agree with you what you said, that this is President Trump in an act of political theater. I actually agree with that. And the reason why is this is what we call shock and awe deterrence. Can you imagine any Venezuelan drug trafficker or a Guatemalan drug trafficker wanting to bring stuff into the United States now that there's an F-35 20,000 feet above them they can't even see? This is a beautiful deterrent to protect young lives. And I'll leave just one last point here, Mason, because I respect the heck out of you. You understand the root causes of addiction. I lost my uncle when I was 8 to the poison that came across the southern border. Drug use has gone down. What's gone up is the lethality of drugs. When that son of the YouTube former CEO died at UC Berkeley, that was his first and last time using that drug. He was not an addict, he was not poor. This was not an addiction problem. And so when you have young kids like Luke Emanuel here in California who died at 13 because he was experimenting with what he thought was a Percocet, that's not an addiction problem, that's actually a supply problem. And the lethality of a supply, whether it's the Venezuelan gangs or the Mexican gangs, that needs to be addressed, and I applaud what the president did here.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things to talk about with what you just said. The majority of the drugs that are coming into this country are coming from legal ports, boats driven by U.S. citizens, right? Violence as a first tactic, as a first move to solving problems at a national level is not going to be predicted to be the best solution or the best first course of action. Bombing or destroying this boat also destroys any evidence of what was inside the boat. It doesn't allow due process, which is what would usually happen under a normal presidency if we saw drugs like these coming into our country. I think that how he handled this drug problem, again, not a nuclear strike, not an imminent threat, something comparable to that, is very indicative of what his goals are as a president.
Cool. So if I may, I agree with you that Trump needs to address the demand side of a drug problem and be more comprehensive in that, because this alone won't solve the drug problem. That said, we have both a demand and a supply problem, and this will help with the supply side. Now, you said that this shouldn't be the first resort. It's actually the last resort because traditional interdiction methods just haven't been working. Like Coast Guard pulling over boats and going through the boats and going through this process actually hasn't been working because, in fact, it hasn't worked so much that their goals for taking over these boats and confiscating drugs is like 7 to 12% of the supply coming through. That's their goal. So we need a deterrent so that we don't have so many people trying to supply drugs in the first place. And we need to make sure that we're dealing with mental health issues, addiction issues, so people don't want the drugs. Now, to James's point, we're not just talking about drugs. Fentanyl is a whole different animal. This is closer to a bioweapon than a drug. It's far more addictive than cocaine, meth, anything that's been entering our country before, which is why Trump designated Tren de Aragua as a narco-terrorist organization. And whether they're just bringing in the fentanyl for economic purposes because it's better for their bottom line because it gets a more addicted buyer, or it's to destabilize the country, it's actually kind of hard to tell because they've also claimed that Maduro, president of Venezuela, is working with Tren de Aragua. Now, I can't verify that for myself, but if he were trying to work through them, he essentially is funneling a bioweapon into our country that's killing 80,000 Americans a year. So I agree, we need to have good process around this. I would actually like to see Congress authorize an AOMF so that he can continue to do what he just did. Because to me, the only part that's not justified is potentially the legal justification, but morally and from a national security perspective, it's 100% justified.
You know what the legal justification the Trump administration gave?
Tell me.
Do you know what it is?
Tell me.
It was anticipatory threat, which is something that the international law explicitly says is not a valid justification through the use of military strike without any sort of actual evidence of that. And so when you have unidentified people that are killed, who we don't know the names of, who, yes, we know that there were substances there, but we didn't have proper intel, and we just kill them, that's not something that's justified.
When I go to places like Kensington, Philadelphia, and I see young black men who have been sold a lie in this country that poison is somehow going to make their lives better, that they've had drug dealers.
Wait, sold a lie in this country? Who's telling them this that are officials in the country?
Drug dealers.
Well, right.
Sold a lie in this country. I didn't say by the administration.
Gotcha.
When I see young black men who are capable of greatness stooped over because they have a needle in their arm full of Venezuelan or Chinese or Mexican fentanyl, I don't care about Davos or the International Criminal Court. I care about protecting those lives in America. So to that particular prompt, with all due respect, President Trump was right once again.
I think if you care about, black people and the drug problem that is, often seen in black communities, you would love to read about the war on drugs. I think you would also love to read about the fact that poverty is going to predict, engaging in more substances that are harmful. In impoverished communities, we see drugs funneled into those communities more often. That sucks. And to your point, you're right. A lot of our tactics to, get drugs out of this country don't work because 90% of the drugs that are, coming into this country are not, people who are Mexican. They are U.S. citizens, in these boats driving with.
That doesn't make it any better.
No. Hold on. Let me finish talking. Because we're making this argument that we're not able to find these drugs. That's because we're not looking at, at the U.S. citizens who are bringing them into this country from other countries.
Well, if we arrested 90% of them, then we obviously have.
We're not.
They don't get a pass.
You have a very specific rhetorical strategy when you're saying Chinese or Venezuelan fentanyl.
I'm identifying the nationality of the criminals who push poison in our communities.
The substance does not have a nationality.
It absolutely does.
The substance is being sold because there's a demand for it. That's basic market economics. People are selling it because they know they'll get a profit.
Is there a demand to die from fentanyl with one use, yes or no?
People are buying this. People are buying these drugs. Why?
Is it knowingly fentanyl?
Why are people buying these drugs?
Knowingly fentanyl?
Why are they buying them?
They're buying
in the first place?
Adderall. They're buying a Percocet because they want to get high. They want to get turned up Memorial Day weekend.
That is the issue.
But listen,
that is the issue.
If you or I tried a Percocet a year ago, 10 years ago rather, guess what? Might have had a headache, might have had a stomachache, might have had our stomach pumped out. If you drink alcohol and you're 17 and the alcohol kills you, we don't sit and blame you and say, well, the alcohol was adulterated, it was your fault, you shouldn't have been drinking. No, you're allowed to make mistakes in this country without dying of a drug overdose.
Yeah, we agree, and I think that you're properly diagnosing the severity of these substances. That's not something that we're in disagreement of. Are you also in favor of safe injection sites where we can test what these substances look like?
I'm not.
Yeah, there you go. So you don't actually care about the problem.
No,
you're using this as an emotional tactic.
I'm not.
And a rhetorical device to justify the president doing what he wants to people that aren't identified. That's what you're saying,
If you
James.
went into...
You just said people are allowed to make mistakes. How are they supposed to know what is laced with fentanyl if you don't have something like a safe injection
Do you really
site?
think a 19-year-old who's at a party at 2 o'clock in the morning is going to break open a Percocet and test it with a fentanyl chest strip?
If we teach them to, and that becomes common practice, yeah.
Sorry, the same person who's so poor in judgment at 2 a.m. to be splitting a Percocet is now going to also conduct an AP chemistry experiment?
Wait,
that doesn't
hold
make
on,
any sense.
what?
Can I cut in for a second here? I think what James is saying is people are always going to do drugs in this country. For the people who are addicts on the street, there's a different strategy than for people who are at a college party.
Right.
But for people at a college party who just want to do Molly one time and not die, we need to make sure that there's not fentanyl in their Molly. Yeah. We need to make sure that there's not drugs coming from legal ports of entry or illegally entering the country.
Right.
And what we're saying is what Trump did here to deal with that sector of the problem is legally justified, morally justified, ethically justified.
We've already gone over how it's not legally justified. You guys are saying regardless of whether or not it's legally justified, they should continue to do this.
I have not interrupted you a single time, brother.
But you keep rambling, my friend. You keep rambling.
I will not interrupt you, so please do not interrupt me.
Okay, there's 4 of us. Just keep that in mind.
Got it. So what I'm saying is there are multiple dimensions to the problem. This is part of dealing with part of the supply side. And ethically is justified, morally is justified. If Congress has not made it legally justified, then they should. I agree with you, more needs to be done. I'm saying this is a piece of it. It's necessary, it's not sufficient.
I'm saying it's wrong.
Okay, and that's where we disagree.
But you haven't given any explanation or any...
I just told you.
any standpoint.
This is a deterrent for part of the fentanyl supply that's entering the country.
5%, maybe.
I don't know what the percentage is.
That's the problem.
Well, but listen, if we're only interdicting 7% of it, we can't possibly know what the problem is. One thing that you said at the very beginning, and I really appreciated it, was good faith. And I think the way to test whether we're acting in good faith is whether we're open to being wrong. I am open to being wrong on this issue. I appreciate your point on the international law. I think that where we differed on that was we don't actually give too much value to what European bureaucrats think about our laws and what we should be doing. But I think we left off on an interesting point, which is at what point would something like this be justified? And I think you pointed to imminent. And so it'd be interesting to see a world in which you would support a decision like this by the president.
All right, well, that seems to be it. Satan is pregnant with the president's child. So Fox News can now confirm Donald Trump has been f***ing Satan this whole time. Yeah! This is a great day for Fox News!
Mocking the sitting president on South Park isn't edgy, it's disrespectful and irresponsible.
3, 2, 1.
Well, I think mocking any president is okay if it's done in good humor and good faith. I think this idea that he has a small penis, like South Park said in one of the earlier episodes, that he's having sexual intercourse with the devil, it's not in good humor. And I think it distracts from what could be a real disagreement about policy issues. So I do think it's irresponsible. I think it fuels this radicalization that we're seeing, quite frankly, on the left toward Republicans. We saw that with the 2 attempted assassinations of the president. We saw that with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I think that this idea of rhetoric that demonizes, quite literally, that is the demon, Satan, demonizes Republicans, it is irresponsible. It's not funny. And it's protected by the First Amendment, but so am I protected as well, Mason, calling it out.
Yeah, James, I think that you are such a professional, and I think that you deserve your own show on Fox News. The way you articulate yourself and the way that you defend the regime, I think is fantastic. I think there's a lot of nuance there too. But South Park, to pretend like there's like meaningful political dialogue happening on a show like South Park is to dismiss like what the 27 or 28 seasons that it's been. It's always been about that very extreme satire with very grotesque and crude humor. Yeah. I don't think that it's about everybody's like taste. I think that being able to mock people in positions of authority, regardless of what party they are or what principles they have, I mean, that's going to be something where it's going to be different tastes of people. To say that it's like disrespectful and irresponsible, I don't know. I mean, it's a cartoon cutout. They're having like his little mouth go. Like, I think it's like very middle
I gotta admit, I
school
laughed at some of it. I saw the first couple episodes, but I also gotta tell you something that I disagree with my party on. Not the party, but a lot of people who said this. This F Joe Biden thing, I thought was deeply irresponsible and disrespectful. I disagree with President Biden. I wish him well. But the idea of saying F-U-C-K Joe Biden.
So do you think there's a difference with South Park talking about the president like that and President Trump having a Let's Go Brandon flag, which is insinuating that exact thing that you're talking about?
Look, I think anybody mocking the presidency of the United States, whether that happens happens on the left or right is wrong. It's okay to make good jokes, and we've seen these, whether it's SNL or Mad TV when I was growing up as a kid. Those were a lot of fun stuff about the Iraq War and all the jokes there. But the idea that you would demonize the president, again, protected by the First Amendment, but I'm also protected in disagreeing with it, that he is in bed with Satan, is in many ways just a rationalization of what Democratic politicians have been laundering for years now. That the president—
Let's not pretend like Republicans are absolved of that, though.
I don't disagree.
Like the attempted assassination on Pelosi's husband. Like let's not pretend like there weren't jokes done.
Let's not pretend. You're right. You're right. And so I think mocking anybody to that degree, let's mock them on their policies. Let's mock them on the fact that they defunded the police in 2020. Let's mock them on the fact that they can't agree that there's two sexes in the world. Let's not mock them on this idea that they're in bed with Satan, whether that's a Republican or a Democrat. It wouldn't be any different. I would be just as offended by this if they were saying that President Obama was in bed with a man.
Is it edgy? Obviously it's edgy. Is it disrespectful? Obviously it's disrespectful. I don't think comedians have a responsibility to be respectful. To be respectful is to hold someone in high regard. I think the point of a jester is it's the one role where you expect them to be disrespectful. And I think having not just permissible comedy, but a culture of we want comedians to take risks and say things that maybe we're all gonna really dislike is actually really important. And I think there was actually an anti-comedy culture that was perpetuated by, I think, the left over the last 5 years that is fortunately falling away. And I think now we've sort of opened up the Overton window and we can actually do these things. That said, I think what it's reflecting to me is really troubling. I agree with you, James. It's a reflection of a culture that actually views the other side as evil. And my concern is not that South Park is contributing to this, because again, I think that the comedian is just the release valve for a culture. My bigger concern is that people resonate with this at all. And I think if we were in a healthier place as a country, it wouldn't even be about getting offended. People would just be like, this just kind of sucks. It's like just not funny.
That's right.
But the problem is people find it funny because they actually view Trump as evil. They actually view him as satanic. They actually view his supporters as satanic. I know that's a bit of a straw man. I know there's many people who don't view it that way and they just see it as a legitimate disagreement. But as we just saw, there was a political assassination today and many people actually view the opposite. And many more people than I'd like.
Well, and last night in DC, the president went out for the first time ever in DC and had dinner. And there were protesters calling him Hitler, calling him our modern day Hitler, shouting at him just feet away from his table. And so South Park isn't responsible for that, to your point, but South Park is a reflection of our politics that, okay, you disagree with Trump about this, that, or the other, fine, but don't demonize the guy. Don't put him in bed with, literally, with Satan.
Yeah. Well, that's been done for every administration. Let's not pretend like it's a new part.
It was not done for the Biden administration.
It absolutely was.
Nearly to this
If you're
degree.
talking about satanic panic, it's going to be a particular side, my friend. And that's going to be conservatives that are talking about Joe Biden as eating children, as pedophiles.
Oh, no, I'm talking about South Park specifically. Are you saying South Park did this
no,
for Joe Biden?
I'm talking about the broader cultural impact that James is
I mean, you have Alex Jones and calling everyone satanic pedophile.
It's not just Alex Jones is a small case. It's a large portion of the MAGA base in particular.
Sure. And
I don't think the large portion of the MAGA base would say that.
I think it's unhealthy, period, irrespective of who's doing it to whom.
But it's going to continue.
And I would hope that we can do something to stop it because I think it's actually killing us as a country.
Let's separate calling Trump satanic, which I think is the joke, but the resonance with Trump being evil, I think that's a totally different story. And I think evil is a very interesting, loaded word. I don't think we're talking about like in a religious way, but Trump being someone who we would say is a bad person or perpetuating harm towards people negligently, a lot of people would resonate with that. I would resonate with that. And also as well, when we talk about politics, it's not really just about disagreements. Like I think there are certain politics that maybe we can, take our emotions away from it. We can take character away from it. A lot of politics that we're seeing being perpetuated right now, absolutely not. What's happening with ICE and what's happening with the immigration, how it's being carried out, I think we can definitely, I cannot remove my emotions from that, especially as someone who has been in LA this summer. So I don't think it would be wrong for people to be feeling these ways and to be feeling anger. I think we're allowed to call Trump under scrutiny. I think we're allowed to not like him. I think we're allowed to call him a bad person, immoral. These are words we're allowed to use. A show like South Park, which is satirical, is going to represent it in a satirical, overt way. Obviously, Trump is not having a child with the devil, but does this represent the way that people are feeling anger about Trump and his immorality? For sure.
Yeah, and I'm not disputing that. I'm saying I'm troubled by the reflection. If that's the face that's looking in the mirror, I'm troubled by what the face is, which is a face of, it just feels hateful.
We all know what...
And the hate, again, I see it on the right toward the left, I see it on the left toward the right, and I just don't like
People
it.
should feel
right.
hate.
And by the way, I think
I don't think hate is ever productive, actually. I think you can feel anger.
Okay, maybe that's what I mean.
I think
angry about deportations.
Yeah, I think anger and hate are very different things. I mean, anger, you can feel angry because you feel like something is just not in alignment with the truth, or there's a better way to do things. But hate, I mean, a lot of what I look at is, I think generally when people are justifying or celebrating political violence, which, by the way, as someone who lives in LA, I experience in my friend group, people celebrating Trump nearly getting killed and saying, I wish the bullet hit him. I heard that literally from people. I was like, oh, that's not just anger, that's hatred. That's actually evil. Yeah, I find this troubling trend. And I think, it's not just the left, like it's this extremism more generally, where people move from I disagree to I want that person shot and killed because I think they're evil, and I think that's the best solution, and it's never the best solution. And that's my concern with what South Park is showing. People are entitled to feel how they feel, but I think it's actively destructive if people feel this way.
I think that there's always a double standard that's set specifically towards the left, that the left is all of these hateful, satanic, mentally ill people. When we saw some of the worst stuff come out, and this is from somebody who does not like Nancy Pelosi, but seeing the comments made by prominent conservative pundits, these aren't just great random people on the internet, of Charlie Kirk, maybe a bad example right now, of certain prominent political people saying that they should be raising money for bail for the person who broke into Nancy Pelosi's home and bludgeoned her husband. Like, that is not something that is indicative of like an equal playing field of hatred. I think that it's very explicitly in one direction.
Correct.
And you'll find some random people on Twitter on the left who are calling for that too. But when Barack Obama, when Kamala Harris, when Zoran Mamdani, a lot of the prominent figureheads of the left are actively showing sympathy for what happened today. Like, I think that that's different when it comes to the leadership apparatus, not just the people that are the electorate.
Just to be super clear, I'm just holding a standard of, I don't care who's doing it. I think it's disgusting when it's done to Paul Pelosi. I think it's disgusting when it's done to Charlie Kirk. I think it's disgusting when it's done to Trump. My point is that hatred is here, and we need to call it what it is when we see it. And we shouldn't be justifying it by saying, oh, well, the other side's more hateful. I don't care who's more hateful. I just want hatred to stop.
It doesn't excuse it. Right? It doesn't excuse it.
I don't care.
And I think a way for us to think about it, because I think you bring up a great point, Mason. And we think we have to be honest about the Paul Pelosi thing and call it out as conservatives. That was unacceptable. That was completely unacceptable what happened. If you were just kind of create a backward-looking poll for a second. If you asked people, Democrats in the 1980s, do you hate Ronald Reagan? Hate. If you ask them, do you hate Ronald Reagan? Maybe you get 2 or 3%. You ask Republicans in the 1990s, do you hate Bill Clinton? Maybe 4 or 5%. And then something changed. And now, if you ask Democrats today, and then you ask Republicans today too about Joe Biden, but if you ask Democrats today, do you hate Donald Trump? That number, let me ask you, do you hate Donald Trump?
I think your guys' definition of hate is very different from a lot of people's definition of hate, especially coming from someone who, again, Gen Z, the way that we express our emotions is very different. I don't think.
Right, but do you hate him?
Well, let me finish talking first. I think that when someone says, like, they hate someone, they might mean, oh, I don't align with them whatsoever. I think that what they're doing is wrong and deplorable, whatever. I don't think hating someone means that you want them gone from this earth. People are definitely more visibly angry about certain presidencies, and I think that there's a valid reason for that. I don't think that every time that someone is like, gosh, I really don't like this, and I'm experiencing a lot of anger, that is misplaced or that is wrong. So that's what I'm going to get at here.
Right. Okay. So I'll give you a definition of hatred, and let's see where we are. Hatred is harboring ill will towards someone such that you want them to be harmed. Do you feel that way about Donald Trump?
I think that perpetuating harm towards people is not ever necessarily my intention. No, I don't think that that's how I would go about using the word hate. I'm still contesting that. But regardless, I don't feel like I want certain people to be harmed with my anger with them or with my frustration with them.
Great, and I'm glad to hear that, genuinely. I think there's a lot of the country who actually hates him by my definition.
Sure.
And that's my concern.
And perhaps 1 out of 4 Democrats, just thinking about my own social circles, I got a lot of Democrat friends actually. If I asked they'd probably 1 out of 4 would say they actually hate Donald Trump. That definition is going to vary, let's be completely honest. There's not an objective definition to that. And there's a real toxicity to our politics today. And I got to tell you the truth, I'm grateful to Jubilee for bringing us together. We would not be at this table if it weren't for them even having these discussions, that's how we can mend the divide in this country.
Do you think so, though? Like, I think that a lot of the entertainment being intertwined with politics has led to increased radicalization, to where people are only consuming political content in some instances. And I think a lot of these people who have these feverish feelings of hatred towards either party is in most part because all they're consuming are echo chambers of the same thought.
I agree.
And I think a majority of the people watching this video will be like, I want to see Mason and Zina kill these guys, or I want to see, you know what I mean? Like,
sure.
I think that that's what it's going to be. But I still think it's important to have these conversations because you want to get these viewpoints heard, especially to those that don't have the same ideas that we do. But I think that the intertwinement of, like, again, I'm going for my comedy to watch Steven Crowder, where there's always going to be a political spin on it, or I'm watching Destiny own these MAGA people. Like, is that really helpful to our overall conversation?
No, it's not. And those are obviously clipped up examples, but just, they always say don't read the comments, right, Zina? But I always read the comments, and I'm crazy for that. But I read the comments of these Jubilee videos, and I've been honored to be a part of one before this. And I gotta tell you, I see Republicans disagree with me. I see Democrats agree with me. I think when you break out of that echo chamber and you bring Republicans to an audience where they can hear you guys, and you bring Democrats to an audience where they otherwise are not going to seek out our stuff and our commentary and our thought leadership. That's a beautiful thing. I think one thing that we can do is invite debate into our own lives by just seeking out information that we otherwise might not be exposed to. I got to tell you, as much as I'm on Fox News, I don't actually watch it all that much. I tend to watch CNN. I tend to watch shows like Abby Phillip where they've got conservatives and Democrats debating, and I'm grateful to be here doing that with you guys.
Yeah, I've been on quite a bit of Jubilee videos. My resume is getting bigger with this video in particular. So I'm not against going on. I think that it's important to be able to have these conversations and expose your viewpoints if you feel like you're somebody that's confident in what it is that you hold as a concrete worldview. I guess my broader criticism is that is becoming the only thing that people are consuming in some instances. And I think that technology has definitely radicalized that to where we're given information on the dot and you're able to access everything that's going on in the world in seconds. I don't think it's impossible to take that ability out of people's repertoire, but I do think that it's important to recognize that nuance and figure out how can we build community again. I'm really in favor of creating systems or third spaces where people are actually able to involve themselves in their broader community instead of just being terminally online, because I think that is really destroying people's ability to comprehend what's going on.
And just really quickly, as someone who has also been on Jubilee, I really do want to illuminate kind of like the reason that I've come on is that like almost all of the feedback I have gotten is that I'm exposing people to new ideas that are helpful for them, that I'm exposing them to creators who look like them, and that I'm able to articulate things in a way that makes sense for people, knowing what I can say and what I can bring to the table that I hope to see in these conversations that I don't always see in these conversations. So I think that's important as we see social media being a huge vessel for us to consume political content. I want to do that the right way and bring my voice to any table where I know that I'm perpetuating more good than bad.
Cool. So first of all, thank you guys. This was fun and productive, I thought. I think it's really healthy for people to see people with different worldviews come together and have a civil discussion, and I think this was civil the whole way. And look, America just needs to heal. I don't think any of us likes the situation that America's in right now. I think it's very emblematic that we're here on the day that Charlie Kirk got assassinated. And we're going in a scary direction, but I think having spaces like this for conversations like this are part of that healing, because unfortunately, I think the genie's out of the bottle and now everything is intertwined: culture, entertainment, politics. And the solution is us. The solution is not gonna be to change the algorithms or politicians are going to change their ways. We have to change our ways because they're supplying our demand. So the demand needs to change. And I think what we did today, hopefully, even if some people wanted to watch you guys destroy us or us destroy you, and I don't see why anyone needs to destroy anyone, hopefully people just thought in a new way and maybe heard something that they hadn't heard before and actually ruminate on it. Thanks for having a good conversation.
A lot of fun.
It was great.
A lot of fun.
Yeah.
A lot of fun.
Thanks for coming here, everyone. And Fox News, get James a show. I'm
Yeah,
telling
this
you,
is your guy, for sure.
Wow, beautiful. That's a wrap.
Thanks, Zina.
Roundtable.
So nice to meet you guys.
Well done.
Thank you.
Good job, man. Good job.
Yes. Boom, that was like nice.
Yeah.